what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
Small off-duty Czechoslovakian traffic warden.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Alright dudes, it's time for another episode of It's Time to Rewind. I am known as Bubbawheat, not the Bubbawheat, not first name Bubba, last name Wheat, just Bubbawheat. This season is Red Who, where I'm covering British sci-fi like Red Dwarf and Doctor Who, and joining me 3 million years in the future, via the TARDIS, is my guest Eric Deutsch. How are you doing today?
Hello, I am fine, although I don't know what reality I'm in right now.
Yeah, it's, this is the Red Dwarf reality. Instead of the Doctor Who reality. Although technically, there is a little bit of crossover. I forget which episode, but did you know that one of the, I think, set designers snuck a tiny TARDIS into the Red Dwarf miniature. So it is visible on camera, I believe, in one episode.
Ah, okay.
So theoretically, they could exist in the same universe.
Alright, it's all Tommy Westfall stuff then.
Yeah. And this episode, we are talking about Out of Time, the sixth and final episode of Series 6 of Red Dwarf, originally released on November 11th, 1993. But before we jump into today's episode, Eric, what's your history with this show?
Yeah, I discovered this show, I don't know, it was sometime in the 90s, I don't remember exactly when, but it was one of those things where I just had the TV on, and an episode of it came on. It might have been Sci-Fi Channel, I'm not entirely sure, and I watched it, and I was like, well, this show is kind of right up my alley, and so I never, became like a diehard viewer where I set out to always watch it, but it certainly was a show where if I happened to be watching TV and it was on, I would definitely turn it and would watch it. I think it's a very funny show. I think it's a very clever show, and it's one of those shows also that I've always wanted to do a start to end binge watch of, and I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. Although these days it's a little bit harder. I did mine last year. I've talked about it before. I collected the DVDs, and I collected them 1 through 5, and then I think I had found some of season 6 online afterwards at some point. But then last year I did a start to finish watch of the show because it was on Tubi. So it was easy to watch for free on Tubi, but it's since then is no longer on Tubi. It is available in a couple spots where you can purchase, but I'm kind of a cheapskate.
So am I.
Yeah. So if it's available free, I would definitely watch it, but pay for it. I will just find something else of the hundreds and thousands of other things available to watch out there. It sounds like you kind of watched it piecemeal. Did you know kind of did you look into knowing what seasons you were in? Did you have a female Holly or the male Holly?
If I remember correctly, it was the female Holly. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, that was Hattie Hayridge. So that would have been between seasons 3 and 5.
Okay.
And then this is series 6, and this was kind of a big change where they had lost Red Dwarf, and it's been a year, so I forget why they lost Red Dwarf, and they've been spending quite a while just flying around in Starbug trying to catch back up to it.
Yeah, the episode that I remember the most from when I used to catch it was, and I have to assume this is probably an episode that you're covering on your show because of what happens in the plot. They're talking about time moving backwards. And I remember Crichton doing this really funny monologue about watching Germany lose World War II because you're watching Hitler retreat instead of advance, and how great it would be for history. And that's the episode that always stood out to me.
Yeah. We definitely covered backwards, and that is kind of like I feel like it's kind of a top 5 Red Dwarf episode. But this one, I'm not sure where it ranks. This was, I chose this one out of Series 6 because this is kind of the most timey-wimey. There is a time travel element to it, even though it's relatively minor. And I had forgotten about the whole cliffhanger because this is actually, this was the series finale of Series 6, and this is actually the last episode that was written by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor. After this series, Rob Grant kind of left, and Doug Naylor has been the one to go on and continue to the show after that, after this by himself. And there was also kind of a bigger gap between this season and the next season. I believe it was about 4 or 5 years.
Oh, wow. On a cliffhanger like that, too. Wow.
Yeah, really. And also, I believe that's which I know you said that you weren't going to watch ahead to find out what happens in the next, the first episode of Series 7. Ticket to Ride, and I've also kind of forgotten about this, and I believe that it is kind of one of those things it's not quite as bad as going into Series 3, where they have like the super fast Star Wars crawl that explains all the changes, but I do think that it's a very kind of very quick hand wavy explanation of how they ended up getting out of it.
Okay, yeah, because I had never seen this episode before watching it for this podcast, and so I didn't know it was a cliffhanger. And when there were about 2.5 minutes left or so of the episode, I remember thinking, how are they going to wrap this up? And the next is just this is what are they going to do here? And then it said to be continued. I was like, oh, bummer.
Yeah, and this episode starts. We basically start with a little bit of fun that is not entirely relevant to the rest of the episode, where Rimmer kind of gives an update of what's been going on throughout this season, where they're running low on supplies on Starbug. The morale's low, and he's decided to put himself in charge of raising morale, and by doing that, he wants them to have a weekly meeting where they can air out complaints, and he's going to start with himself, and then he's just ragging on all 3 of the other members of the crew.
Yeah, it's great, and he calls cat a git, which I'm glad he did, because I absolutely love that British word. I remember learning it when I was little from watching Monty Python, and it's just one of those words that always struck me as very funny, so I was glad to see it in use.
Yeah, it's funny too, because there's an interesting mix, and I talked about this on an earlier episode, because whenever I first watched this, I don't think I realized that smeg was a made up word. I thought that it was just British slang. And I think they do have like kind of a mix, because they have git, and like Gimboid I believe is another one that's made up for the show that they use once in a while.
Okay.
But the thing that I kind of love is whenever he's ripping on Lister is just there on the bottom of the screen, just completely enjoying it. Like Craig Charles has a smile on his face. Like it's not fazing him at all.
Yeah, he does not care. Probably even agrees with him.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. And then we actually, kind of compared to some of the earlier seasons, we do get to the kind of meat of the episode a bit relatively early on. Because I feel like in a lot of the earlier series, you have like the first half of the episode is completely unrelated to the second half of the episode. But I think that this one does kind of nice, and even that kind of airing of grievances and like the little discussion beforehand, because before Rimmer comes in, they're having the discussion that they're bored, they don't celebrate anything anymore. And this, it kind of ties into how their future selves behave. Whenever the future selves come in and they're all about opulence and decadence and kind of enjoying life to its fullest, despite where they might be getting that enjoyment from.
Yeah, the years of boredom and tedium just drove them to the completely far extreme with those 15 years in the future selves later on.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, whenever they run into this giant space cloud and Lister gets knocked out. What did you think of this? Especially coming from someone that hasn't watched a ton of Red Dwarf. Whenever they revealed that Lister was a mechanoid, like were you fooled, or did you expect this to be like a fake out right away?
I expected it to be a fake out for two reasons. One, because even though I'm not a diehard fan of the show, I had seen enough episodes to know that obviously this is something that's not going to be the case. But also, it's just a bit of a spoiler watching this episode for your podcast, because obviously it was going to be something that was going to involve an alternate reality or a different time stream or something like that.
Yeah, and I had forgotten about this moment, and I forgot how the explanation goes, but it is a fun moment where Crichton completely buys into it, and
Oh, yeah.
that does eventually make sense whenever we do see the other pockets of unreality a bit later into the episode, because the whole point of the unreality is that it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, infinite probability drive,
Mm-hmm.
where anytime they hit this pocket of unreality, it completely changes reality, but it changes it 100% for all the people, including their memories and their beliefs. So that makes sense that in this little pocket of unreality, Lister really is a mechanoid.
Yeah, and they called them unreality bubbles, and they said that it creates false reality pockets. And I actually, obviously this show is not, it's not Star Trek as far as, making sure the science all works out. But I was like, unreality to me is different than a false reality. To me, the four different things that we see happen to them when they hit the false reality pockets, to me, those are false realities. It's not really an unreality. To me, unreality would be just a completely different dimension where all rules of science are completely upside down or something like that.
Yeah, I can kind of see the difference. Although one other thing that kind of surprises me too, whenever Crichton goes full 180 whenever he believes that he is higher ranked than the older model mechanoid. And I did kind of like the explanation that Crichton gives for why the Lister mechanoid looks much more lifelike, looks much more accurate to a human copy than Crichton does.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was actually like really smart, and it's something that you could buy into. That at one point they got so advanced that they made extremely lifelike human copies of that are androids, but that ended up being too creepy for everybody and too unnerving. And so the future ones, they went backwards and made them less human-like, so that way it was more obvious that they were androids. And I think that does make sense, and I could see a real history going in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if humanity ever gets to that point, I could absolutely see that happening. You know, you get the ones that are, like the ones, the bishop ones from Aliens or something like that, you can't tell. I could see it eventually being backlash. Say, hold on, we got to pull this back.
Yeah, like Blade Runner and all those
Yeah.
things like that. Ex Machina.
Yep.
But I do think that it's kind of weird, and it feels un-Crichton-like, because he makes Lister do the laundry, and he makes him do it like it's a chore that he doesn't enjoy doing. But in all the previous episodes, Crichton is presented as, he is someone who enjoys doing laundry. Like, that is one of his pleasures in life.
Perhaps he was doing internal mind gymnastics to make himself think that he enjoyed doing it, and once he was faced with this new reality, he realized, oh, I didn't like that actually at all. Now someone else has to do it.
Yeah, or that was just another, aspect of that unreality bubble.
Sure.
But I do also love this little bit where Lister, he well, even before that, another just moment that is absolutely fantastic that I love is whenever they find out that Lister's a mechanoid, and they say, well, somebody has to tell him, and then Rimmer's like, I forget exactly what he says, but I will do anything if you let me be the one to tell him.
Yes.
And just the absolute joy of wanting to tell him that is such a Rimmer line.
Absolutely.
And it's one of those things, and Chris Berry does this so well, where he, like, Rimmer is in theory, he's such an unlikable character, but Chris Berry somehow makes him likable still.
Yeah, I mean, that's, there are so many comedies, both TV and in movies, there are characters that are meant to be unlikable that are very popular characters. It's just part of the nature of comedy. There's going to be those people that are jerks, but they, they still make you laugh. You still like watching them. I mean, Newman from Seinfeld, it's a great example.
Hmm. And I also have to point out the parts, which is just another fun gag, where Lister comes up with the drinks and sandwiches, and Crichton gets on him about how bad they are and how the sandwiches aren't stacked up like logs, like a log cabin. And then he leaves, and then he comes back with this, it doesn't look like food anymore, but it's like a perfect log cabin with a picket fence.
Yeah, it's like he took Lincoln Logs.
Yeah. And then we get the great Crichton apology, because he realized about the pockets of unreality in the time that Lister left before he came back. I feel like this is kind of the Hitchhiker's Guide, the improbability drive, where we get a handful of very quick unreality moments, to where the first one, Cat becomes intangible to the other. Or not intangible, but he kind of not blinks out of existence because he's there for the viewer, but the other three members of the crew can't see or hear Cat anymore, and very quickly they don't remember him anymore.
Right. Yeah, you knew that this was once the episode has this realization that there's these pockets of non-realities, and we're obviously in one. With him being an android, obviously, okay, this is coming. We're going to get a few other examples of this.
And
I ranked actually the four on which I thought would be the worst to be stuck in versus the best to be stuck in. I thought the of the four, I felt that the one that I would most want would be the one where they're still in the spaceship, but there's no actual spaceship. They're just in their seats with their gear, but the spaceship itself is gone and they're floating through space. I think that actually might be kind of fun. The next most preferable one was if everyone had animal heads, because if everyone has animal heads, then no one's not normal because you all have animal heads. And if you get a cool animal head, that might actually be kind of interesting.
Yeah, and Lister is a wolf.
Yes.
Cat is a deer. Crichton is a rooster, and I believe Rimmer is a cat, or maybe a fox.
Let me look at that.
It's kind of hard to tell because he's. They don't really focus on him very much. He's kind of in the background.
I thought the next worst would be to be an android instead of a human, and then the worst is definitely the one where, if you're erased from existence, you're still there, but no one can see you or hear you or remember you. That's pretty brutal.
Yeah. And I think Danny John Jules as the cat really sells that moment too. It's very brief, but he does a good job of it. It feels kind of weird that they made these decisions. It almost feels like it was a way to extend the length of the episode because or just add an additional problem, which they very quickly write away because they say that it's going to take them about 3 days to get to get through this unreality field, but then they just put them into stasis and they're through it.
Yeah, again, as someone who had not watched this episode before, I thought that was going to be what this episode was. Various different realities of them bouncing around like that. And so when that happened, I was like, oh, all right, well, what's the second half of this episode going to be about then?
Yeah, and that's when we get the introduction of the time machine. They find this derelict space station, and everybody's dead. They died from 20th century influenza, and for some reason their scanners can pick up the fact that it's I believe they said 28th century.
Yep.
Which I don't remember what century the Red Dwarf crew was supposed to be in. I want to say maybe 23rd century.
Okay.
So this would be like 100 years in the future for the Red Dwarf ship technology, but of course it's all still 3 million years in the future. Describe like trying to figure out how the timeline of everything in Red Dwarf works is kind of baffling because it's like they're 3 million years in the future and they're 3 million years away from Earth, and they're kind of coming back. And so in theory, as they get closer to Earth, they're coming up on ships that are farther in the future.
Right.
But it's still, 2,900,099 years in the future for them.
Yeah, I mean, even with the little jump in the episode to get out of the reality pockets, Crichton says he got them through it by putting them in the deep sleep units. And I wrote this down. He says, in theory, time will be frozen and reality and unreality will not be able to penetrate. And I feel like this kind of ties into what you're saying about, trying to figure out the time situation of the show. I'm not really sure how that really works just because they're in a sleep stasis. I mean, okay, it would freeze them so like they wouldn't age, but I don't know why those reality pockets would not affect them just because they're in a sleep stasis. But again, it's not Star Trek.
They're in I believe that they put them in like a time stasis, and I believe they did this one other time.
Oh, okay.
Because I mean that's how Lister survived 3 million years, because he was in stasis.
Got it.
So they were doing that. Although it does kind of not make sense that Starbug would have that capability on it. It would make sense if they were still on Red Dwarf, but it makes a little bit less sense that they would have that capability on Starbug and also have that ability to house two people in there instead of just one.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It is what it is. What's the MST3K? You should really just relax.
Yes, exactly. Although if we just relaxed, we wouldn't have any of these podcasts that we all do.
Right. But then we eventually get the, kind of the heart of the episode where they get this time travel device that they're able to hook up to Starbug. And I do love this first kind of gag. And again, it's, you said that Red Dwarf doesn't necessarily have to worry about real science fiction, but in a lot of times the science fiction stuff elements that they bring into the show is based on real science, and they do take that stuff into account. And that because like Red Dwarf as a ship, like the propulsion system, like that little cage in the front, that's actually based on a real theoretical faster than light drive, and because that collects hydrogen particles, which it uses to feed its fusion reactor, and that's kind of based on real science. And some of the other things like the white hole episode is based on real scientific theories, and even the backwards episode that you talked about is based on something, a theory that I believe was in Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time, where he theorized about the big crunch that after the universe expands to a certain point, the expansion slows down and then it stops and then it kind of comes back in a big crunch.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that has been theorized. And in this episode, we get the time travel where they travel to the 14th century, but they're still in deep space because
it's so funny.
It doesn't move them across in time. So they're in deep space, but they're in Middle Ages deep space.
Yeah. That was so funny because there are some times that you are watching stuff in science fiction where they time travel and it also changes the location. And that always has driven me crazy when I've seen that, because it should not do that. It should only change your time, not your location. So I thought that was very clever.
Yeah. And I can't remember. There was something that I was watching relatively recently that actually had that as a plot element, because even Back to the Future, which takes that to a certain extent, but even Back to the Future isn't correct, because if you're talking about you have to be in the same spot, but the Earth moves in space, so being in Twin Pines, going from 1980s to 1950s, it wouldn't be the same spot on the Earth, because the Earth would be in a completely different spot in space.
Good point.
So the DeLorean would just appear and it would be in the middle of space.
Good point. Or in the middle of the planet.
Yeah. But that's kind of a quick gag, and then we get kind of the real meat of the climax of this story with the introduction of the second Starbug, and it's the crew from the future. And we have this entire conversation about how they shouldn't meet themselves from the future because the human minds can't comprehend that sort of situation.
Yeah, I actually had an issue with that explanation because only one of the people in the crew is human. So I thought, it would have been a funny gag for them to sort of say, oh, it can't handle the human mind can handle it, and then to not really care because like, oh, well, Lister's dealing with a human, so who cares?
Yeah, and they have also,, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, Crichton says that he can wipe his memory, but they've also, you know, had an episode in season 2, thanks for the memory, or I think it was that one, and there was another one where they've shown that Crichton's not the only one that can have his memory erased. He can erase parts of Lister's and Kat's and Rimmer's memories as well.
And he proceeds to not erase his memory in this episode anyway.
Well, I mean, it's the situation. He never kind of gets to the point. Like in theory, he would be doing that after everything's settled down, and they never got to that point. Everybody died before then.
Right.
But we do get this moment where Crichton contacts the other ship, and then we have this whole scene with Crichton, being extremely nice to Lister, which clearly something horrible happens to Lister, and this entire scene is Lister just trying to get it out of Crichton what happens to him.
Yeah, nice visual gag too when he says, "Don't use all the peppers." I think it is. Because otherwise, we don't even have any peppers left for tomorrow, and Crichton's just like, and just dumps them all in the bowl.
Yeah, and I think this is another moment which we get a handful of them where we see like how capable Lister is. Because Lister is a slob, he's kind of the everyman, but he is actually pretty capable. Like, he's a pretty capable engineer whenever he puts his mind to it.
Mm.
And he's able to, even though Crichton has shut off all the monitors, he's able to hack into the system and hook the cameras up to the medical scanner. So he can see what's going on in the lower decks with the future. And what do you think of the future crew of Red Dwarf?
My favorite is definitely the Crichton one with the ridiculous toupee. I mean, it just looks so stupid. It's just really great. And then to me, the second best gag, it also involves hair. The fact that it's not just that he's a brain in a jar, but it has his hair attached to the jar. I mean, it's
the jar
so
has
funny.
The dreadlocks on top. Yeah, that's great. And in future Crichton, he also has fake eyebrows.
Yes.
Too. And he's wearing like a leisure suit with a turtleneck.
Yep.
And a gold chain.
And I mean, he's the one character that you would think actually might have not changed for the future. Like, you can see the other three all giving into all this, but he's like the one that you thought maybe would have been a little, I don't know that we should do this, but he's all in.
I mean, it's no Ronald Reagan mask. And we get the Lister braid in a jar, which there's no real explanation of how this is working, because it literally just looks like a brain in, this yellow fluid with some electrodes attached to it and the dreadlocks on the top of the jar. It looks like a big candy dish almost.
Yeah.
But the brain lights up as it's speaking, and there's no visible speakers or anything, but he still speaks with Lister's voice.
Yes. No voice box, no speakers, no nothing, but somehow everyone hears him loud and clear.
Yeah. And the cat is he looks pretty old, and of course he's balding, and he has the moment where he's brushing his hair, and a big chunk comes out, and he just tries to put it right back on his head.
Yeah. Yep.
And even though Rimmer is a hologram, he still managed to gain about 60, 70 pounds.
Yeah, it doesn't matter why. He just did.
Yeah. I think I don't remember if they explain it, but I think the fan explanation is that the computer program that projects Rimmer's hologram automatically ages him, to help simulate reality.
Works for me.
Yeah, which that's one way to explain why in the later series that they filmed, much more recently, that he looks much older than he does here.
Yeah, I mean, look, they never. To the best of my memory, Star Trek: The Next Generation never did anything at all to provide any explanation why Data looks significantly older 20 years later from the season 1 of the show. They just bothered to just kind of pretend it didn't exist, So at least this one gave some kind of explanation if you got the fans doing that.
Yeah, although they like the 7 years of the, let's see, what's trying to think of what the timeline was between the first episode and the last movie, like not counting the Picard series.
Yeah, well, so it premiered in '87, I believe, and then the last one came out in, I think, I don't know what, 04, 05, 06, something like that, maybe.
Yeah, so that would be almost 20 years.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he does have enough heavy makeup where, I mean, he definitely looks older, but I think the makeup does hide a lot of that for Data, at least. But here we don't get that because the only makeup for Rimmer is the H on his forehead.
Right. I was thinking about other brains in jars, and I actually, because I mean, this is a standard sci-fi trope, the brain in the jar, and the two that came to mind, RoboCop 2. There's that brain that still has the eyes attached, which is a really creepy visual. That's like the main mastermind villain. And then this is a bit of a cheat because it's not brains, it's entire heads, but of course all the Futurama heads in jars.
Yeah, although they did have the one entire planet of the brains that
yeah, that's right.
bounced.
That's right. Yes, they did.
And they also lit up whenever they spoke too.
That is true. Yes.
And we get this explanation. We get this discussion where the future Red Dwarf crew needs to copy the schematics of the time travel device so that they can get back to traveling through time again. And we find out that they have become just the most horrible people, just going around to all the worst people in history. I forget, what was the first one that they talked about? I know Hitler was like the second one. Having dinner with Hitler and the Goebbels.
I think it was Louis the 16th, I think.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. And just talking, and of course, Rimmer, whenever he's listing off the opulent food that they've eaten, it's all, everything that he lists is something that modern society would never eat because it's dolphin and elephant.
Yes. and the line that current Crichton has that really cracked me up was, Hermann Goering is a bit dodgy.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot of fun. And then we, of course, finding out that their future selves are just horrible people. The present crew comes down and we get its Lister with the bazookoid.
Yeah, you see this a lot in sci-fi too, right? The future and past selves being in conflict. It's funny how many sci-fi tropes this one episode kind of packs in. You know, I mean, comic books do this all the time. You see the future self coming back to the past or something. You know, the movie Looper, of course. It's something else that you see a lot of.
Yeah, although a lot of times I think it's the future version is trying to prevent the past version from doing something bad.
Mm-hmm.
And here it's the opposites, where
Right.
the present versions are, basically ready to kill the future versions because they've become horrible people, and
Right.
they themselves just hope to prevent themselves from becoming that way through whatever means.
Right.
And we get this great countdown, and then the future versions leave, and then they turn around and start attacking their past selves and their explanation is, we would rather not exist than not be able to to go through history the way they have been.
I don't think I agree with that, but yeah, all right.
Yeah, and then it ends with this, this cliffhanger. Lister dies, Cat dies, Crichton dies, and we have surprisingly Rimmer trying to do the heroics where he goes to destroy the time device, which I believe in the theory is if he destroys the time device, then that would prevent their future selves from existing.
Yeah, I that's my take too. Although, I mean, maybe I watched it wrong or so. I don't know. But after he shoots the time device, and then they cut to a shot of the ship getting blown up, and it looks like there's a laser blast coming from elsewhere that blows it up. And so I was a bit confused on, was that him blowing up the time machine at the same time as the future selves are then blowing up the ship?
Yeah, I believe I did read a little bit of going into the next episode, the Ticket to Ride,
Okay.
the opening,
Mm-hmm.
and they say that they do revisit this scene and they do make it a little bit more clear in the edit of that version, because they do revisit this scene, like not in its entirety, but they revisit the last little bit of it.
Okay.
To where they make it clear that it is the future Starbug destroys the present Starbug before Rimmer is able to destroy the time device.
Okay, got it.
But actually, I think I do kind of remember that, them doing that creates a paradox, because, if their future selves destroy their past selves, then their future selves would not be able to exist, so they wouldn't be able to destroy their past selves, so that's why the present selves are able to continue existing into Series 7. I'm pretty sure that's kind of the hand-wavy explanation for how they get out of that.
And in the 4 years they had in between episodes, that's all they could come up with.
Well, I mean, a lot of people say that, there's kind of like the series 1 through 6, and then there's everything after that.
Okay.
I think there's a handful of people that, include series 7 and 8 as, still being good, but I think for a lot of the Red Dwarf fandom, there's the series 1 through 6 and then everything else. And,
Okay.
a lot of that is because of that collaboration between Rob Grant and Doug Naylor. And they think that, the two of them together were able to balance each other out really well and create something better than either one of them could do of it individually. And so, from here on out, with just Doug Naylor being the one in charge of everything, the show as a whole suffers to a certain extent.
Oh, okay, I see.
And even, there is a series of 4 novels, which I haven't read any of them, but there's the first 2 novels were collaborations between the 2 of them. They also wrote the novels, and then each individual person wrote one novel. So there's 2 of them written, co-written by both of them. There's one novel written by Rob Grant, and there's one novel written by Doug Naylor.
Okay.
And so I think, I haven't really read the distinction. I've heard all 4 of them are pretty good, but I think you can see the difference between the ones that were co-written together and the ones written separately. And the 2 that they each wrote separately are not as good as when they're together.
Makes sense.
And then, that's the end of Series 6, the end of Out of Time. Do you have anything else to say about this episode?
No, the only other thing that I would have said is harkening back to the beginning of the episode where they're preparing the tea. My family and I were on vacation earlier this year. For the first time in my life, I was in the United Kingdom, and I was so excited to actually have real tea, like an actual go-to British tea with the cakes and the snacks and everything, and we just never found the time to do it, and I was very, very disappointed.
Yeah, sometimes that happens with vacations.
Yep.
There's just not enough time to do everything that you want.
Yep.
But yeah, that's that ends Series 6. I am kind of myself. I'm looking forward to Series 7 because a lot of people don't like it as much, but I do like Series 7 relatively well with the exit of Rimmer and the introduction of alternate reality Kachansky. A lot of people don't like them bringing Kachansky in, but I always liked her as a character. I thought she was a good addition to the show, and I'm kind of disappointed that she hasn't made it back. She's just in the 2 seasons or series, whatever you want to call them. But thanks so much for joining me and talking about some Red Dwarf. And why don't you take a moment and let people know where else you can be found online?
Sure. Well, I'm always happy to guest for you, as most evidenced by being your co-host on the color scenes of the Memento Mori season of this very podcast. And the other podcast that I've been a co-host for in the Movies by Minutes world, Flash Gordon Minute and Escape from New York Minute. So those podcasts are still out there live. So speaking of binging, if you like any of those movies, go give a nice binge listen to those podcasts.
And as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me. I'm on social media everywhere at Bubbawheat. These days, I'm most active on Threads. I kind of look at that as the new Twitter, although at the moment, I feel like Blue Sky is kind of getting a lot of notice as well. Time will tell if Blue Sky manages to overtake Threads or not. But for the moment, it's Threads. But I do have a stake in Blue Sky, so if you're on there, you can follow me there, and 6 months from now, we'll see where I'm at. But for now, Threads is the best way. But anywhere, if you at me, I will still get the notification, and as long as you say something nice, I will most likely reply to you. And we also have a Facebook group. It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group, and you can join that to stay up to date on the episodes as they come out and what we'll be covering in future seasons, and also have discussions about new or old time loop episodes and movies. It's all welcome there. And until next time, smoke me a kipper, and I'll regenerate before breakfast next week.